I'll be honest, out of all three of the games in the trilogy, Dark Souls 2 has easily the weakest lineup of bosses. There are some good ones to talk about, but a lot of them just range from mediocre to just existing. There's not going to be a whole lot positive for me to come out of these bosses, and they're going to be quick and easy for me to talk about, which kind of sucks because they had opportunities, but games suffered with rush development. But it is what it is. I'll try to be at least fair with some of these bosses in Dark Souls 2, but just don't expect much positive from me. Dark Souls 2 is very iffy when it comes to its first boss. Depending on which location you go to, either Last Giant or Dragon Rider will be your first boss that you will deal with. Me personally, I consider Last Giant to be the actual first boss of the game. And for a first boss, it's He just stomps around like a pouting little baby and slaps his hands around on the floor. Which is fine, I guess. It's nothing too exciting. He does rip his arm off, but it's Dark Souls, a video game. So of course he's gonna put barely any use to his second arm. It's just nothing really exciting. It's just an average, mediocre first boss that's just okay, I guess. Not even the music fits the atmosphere of the battle itself, in my opinion, despite being a decent soundtrack. So, yeah, not a great first impression, if you ask me. I'll give him a D. And now, let's get to talk about the other boss that could be your first boss, Dragon Rider. And just like with Last Giant, he's also very mediocre. His movesets isn't really anything exciting, just very basic swings and slams from his halberd. He does put up his shield occasionally, but that rarely has much use. And the music just doesn't fit this boss at all, in my opinion. Overall, it's just another bland and mediocre boss, and I just refuse to believe that this fat, clumsy oaf can even fly a dragon, let alone even slay one. I don't know, it just feels very odd to have him here, so D, I guess. So yeah, not off to a great start. Can we actually get a good boss around here? Well, we actually got one. Introducing the Pursuer. This guy is the equivalent of Nemesis from Resident Evil 3, with only one goal in mind, and it's that to hunt you down. Since you're the bearer of the curse, you'll be dealing with more of these guys in later levels. But honestly, for an early game boss, he does a pretty good job at being a challenging but fair enough opponent to get used to this game's controls. He will throw out his various sword combos and moves that are all reactive and avoidable, his charge moves, and his sword glowing blue, which for some reason has some janky hitboxes, but I never had that issue. It's avoidable by just going to the arm where his shield is. And you can even have the satisfaction of killing him with the ballista if you're able to parry his attacks. Overall, I say this guy does a pretty good job at being an early game boss that's challenging but fair, and that should have been the first boss that Last Giant Dragon Rider ever wished they could be. But it is what it is, so I'm giving him a B. If there's one boss that has a cool design that I rarely see in games, it's the Flexile Sentry. You don't see these type of boss designs in other games, and I think it's one of the more underrated ones. But that being said, the fight itself is also just okay. He does throw out his various hammer swings depending on which head you're fighting against, one with the maces or the other with the swords. I usually prefer fighting the one with the maces since his attacks are more easier to avoid. The one with the swords can throw out combos that is a bit of a nuisance to avoid, but it's really nothing insane or crazy. They do have a grab move that can really hurt if they get you. The only issue with the boss fight is the water. Since it's slowly rising, your movement speed will be limited, and these guys will have a speed advantage against you, which does play out as a bit unfair, but if you can manage through the fight and avoid its attacks, you won't have much issues. So overall, it's another decent fight, but one that I wish was done a little bit better. But still, not really that bad, definitely better than the other two bosses I had to talk about earlier. C. And now we have Discount Ornstein. Oh, I'm sorry. Old Dragon Slayer. Ugh. Honestly, I recommend finding this guy after you take care of the dragon, because once you kill Dragon Rider, the run to him is just irritating and frustrating to go through. And all for what? Ornstein just by himself? The fight itself isn't even anything good or impressive, since it's just Ornstein. He's pretty passive, and most of its attack moves aren't anything exciting or noteworthy. He does utilize dark magic, but it's easy to avoid. He's trying to take in consideration that Smo is supposed to be here, judging his AI, and I wish there was a lot more that could have been done with this boss, even if you want to fight him later on, since it's a very easy encounter, and one that I kind of wish didn't exist in the game, despite having one of the better boss themes in my opinion. Sorry, Dragon Slayer, as much as I wanted to give you credit, you're kind of outdated here. D. Now we got an actual good boss fight to talk about, that being the Ruined Sentinels. Despite there being 3 health bars, you actually confront one sentinel in one location that you start the boss battle. His moves is pretty simple and fair enough to avoid in this small little spot you have to traverse around in, and it's just a learning curve to see what attacks the sentinel will throw at you before you have to deal with the other ones. But upon taking out the first sentinel, the other ruined sentinels will make their way towards you. You'll have plenty of time to try to deal with the second one before the third one jumps in, and it will become a mess. But once you're down on the ground, both sentinels will try to attack you, and it's a gank fight that manages to be a bit tricky, but fair, since their attack moves can give you opportunities to strike at one. The only annoyance would be the spinning attack move, where if both of them do it, then you're pretty much forced to take damage. They will also throw their shields as a frisbee, but it's pretty easy to avoid. Overall, this is one of the few gank fights that's actually really not that bad, and one that I enjoyed fighting against. So for an early game boss that makes you fight against 2, I say this does a pretty good job overall, and one of the more underrated fights in my opinion. B tier. Upon beating the Sentinels, you get access to another location that's optional for you to explore, helping out with the Bell Keepers, and you get to fight the Belfry Gargoyles. And I don't know what to say about this boss, it kinda sucks. Unlike the Bell Gargoyles, where it's a gank fight that manages to be challenging but fair in testing the player's skill, this one is just made to bum rush you, since you have to deal with more than just 2 gargoyles. All of them will become active depending on how much health they lose, and their movesets are so basic and boring that I don't even want to bother explaining what they do. Besides, the fight itself isn't really that tough to manage through, as thankfully they have less health, but it's just really nothing exciting. It's a boring enemy gauntlet, and the attacks they do doesn't bode well, because you're like, when do I get the opportunities to strike when one's doing a flying attack? So yeah, it's just a pale imitation of their original counterpart. Heck, they even had the gall to even reuse the music from the first game. It just goes to show how unoriginal this fight is. I don't really hate this boss, but it's lame. Super lame. D tier. Now we get into one of the major bosses in the game, that being the Lost Sinner. This game has its 4 lords for you to hunt down, and for Lost Sinner, she's fine, I guess. The only gimmick in the fight is the room. Because she put out the torches, you're forced to fire in the dark unless you manage to get a key and light up the torches to prevent that issue. But even without the light source, the fight's just basic. All she does is just jump around, throwing out sword attacks, sometimes having janky hitboxes. But on her own, she's really like nothing too exciting or interesting for me to talk about. It's just a basic sword duel fight as expected. It's really nothing too crazy since her attack moves and speed does fare well in this game's clunky movement, but on her own, it's just really nothing too exciting, to be honest, so I'll have to give her a D. Sorry, Lost Sinner. Okay, I might get a little bit of flack on this one, but I actually kinda like Skeleton Lords. Sure, it just boils down to being a bunch of basic enemies that are easy to deal with, but the concept of the battle itself is actually a neat idea. The idea of dealing with these Skeleton Lords, where if you can kill all of them, you'll deal with hordes of skeletons, or if you kill one at a time, you'll deal with less skeletons to manage through. Thankfully, the skeletons themselves aren't really that annoying to deal with, and the lords do have their various movesets that they can utilize and attack you with. But since the enemies themselves are pretty easy to kill and not as annoying as in the first game, it's a pretty easy boss fight, in my opinion. And it's a shame too, since it's kind of underrated with its cool gimmick, and the music for the fight is actually pretty nice. But I just wish the fight was a bit more challenging, because I could give it a lot more credit and say that it's one of the few enemy gauntlet fights that's actually good. So I'll give him a solid B. Up next is another skeleton boss, that being the Executioner's Chariot, one that has an underrated boss theme and an interesting gimmick, but kind of falls flat on its face. The gimmick of this fight is seen through the cutscene, the gate. You have to go down to the one location where the gate opened up, and you have to close it in order to immobilize the chariot. But there are enemy skeletons that are a bit of a nuisance to deal with, especially since necromancers will keep reviving them. Thankfully, the chariot can run over the skeletons, making it manageable, but then there's the second half of the fight. The boss battle is actually the horse rather than the executioner, and the horse itself isn't really that fun to fight against. It's a bit of a nuisance with its attacks, and its breath moves is just free damage opportunity. They nearly had it with the fight, only with the first half, but the second half didn't really bode with me that well. A shame too, I would have seen myself enjoying the fight and consider it to be one of the better ones in the series. But if only the horse was a bit better, then maybe this boss battle would definitely deserve some credit. D tier. Up next on our list is Discount Jabba the Hutt. Oh, I'm sorry. Covetous Demon. Really? This boss is so bad that it's good. It has to be one of the most questionable things they ever decided to come up with, especially for a boss. Look at this Jabba the Hutt fat ass. You really think this beast is gonna be much of a threat? You would have to try to lose to this fat tubby lord. I don't see the excitement of Covetous Demon. It's just a basic, boring, uninspired battle that just didn't really need to exist in the slightest. The only cool thing it does is it can eat you and spit you out, stripping off your armor, but you'll rarely even see it. Heck, you can even shoot the pots that have the Halloween guys inside and make him eat them. But who's even gonna bother doing that? Not me. This boss is not worth my time. F. Up next is Discount Medusa, Mytha the Baneful Queen. And Mytha will be a boss that you'll either despise or forget that she exists. If you go into the fight normally, look at this! The amount of poison all over the arena! Slow down movement speed, heavy damage to deal with from the poison, she can heal off of it. Yeah, this boss is gonna be a pain to deal with, and only masochists will want to fight this boss in the poison. However, there is a way to contract this. If you manage to go by this one bonfire where you can light up this windmill right here, you'll get rid of the poison. How would you know to do this? Try anything! That's the logic of Dark Souls 2 apparently. But without the poison, her moveset is so basic and boring. She's such a forgettable boss without the poison because of her movesets and attacks. And even when she's chucking her head, yeah, there's nothing I can really reach out for, to be honest. It's just a really lame and easy boss that I wish could have been done a little bit better, or just removed from the game, you know, that would be nice. D tier. Okay, are we actually gonna get a good boss? Oh, it's Smelter Demon. That's actually not so bad. Finally, a boss I can be positive about. Smelter Demon on his own isn't really anything too exciting upon entering into the battle, since he throws out his sword swings and attack moves that he has. But the gimmick he can do is light himself on fire and doing damage upon coming to contact with his body. Heck, he even lights his sword on fire for extra damage, even causing the room to be darker since he's taken the light torch out of the room. It's a neat little detail, and on his own, his moveset is pretty simple, but good enough to where it can be a bit of a challenging and enjoyable fight. Heck, even with the life gems, you can manage through the fire that really does damage to you upon gaining contact to his body. So I say this boss battle is actually pretty enjoyable and one of the ones that I consider to be a bit underrated. Finally, it took a good while for us to get to a boss that I can actually be positive for, especially for the music, even though it's reused from the Ruined Sentinels. Still one of the more underrated tracks in my opinion. Thank you, Smelter Demon, for finally being something worth the hassle. I'm giving you a B. But sadly, the positivity has to end because we're back to the mediocrity. That being the old Iron King, the second major boss in the game. And he's just a less frustrating version of Ceaseless Discharge. But that doesn't really mean much. Since he's a giant boss, of course he's gonna be slow, leaves himself open to attacks a lot of times, very easy to avoid, and honestly, you'll just die a lot more times by falling to your death, let alone that lava pit that they put in front of the boss gate more times than the boss, even though I rarely ever died to that pit right there. His moveset isn't really anything exciting or interesting. And for a boss I've seen in lore that's supposed to be a reincarnation of Gwen, of all things, I would have expected a bit more of a challenge from this Balrog reject, instead of a load of nothingness out of this boss battle. D. Up next on our list is Discount Kilag. Oh, I mean Scorpionish Nachka. What can I say? She's fine. She's nothing really too exciting, just another pointless and forgettable boss that exists. On her own, she does throw out various magic attacks that she has, and can use the scorpion body to attack you, even her tail that you can cut off. She also digs underground. So what? I can dig holes in grounds too. But it's not like it's anything impressive. I don't know, I just don't really care about her. She's just a nothing boss that just happens to exist here because, yes. Come on guys, give us something good. D tier. Up next has to be one of the most pointless bosses to be in the game. Probably Magus and Congregation. Seriously? Look, I know I praise Skeleton Lords for being an enemy gauntlet fight, but this is nothing. It's just a bunch of zombies in a cult. There's nothing positive I can say about this boss because the enemies are easy to deal with, the priest guys are annoying because they can heal, and thankfully you do have the benches to hide behind to avoid dealing with the projectiles. And Magus himself might as well not even be there, since he's just really easy to deal with. His only annoyance is his AoE explosion attack, but there's just nothing exciting or enjoyable. Heck, they even reused the Covetous Demon boss theme for this battle. Why even make this a boss, even for lore reasons? You could've just made this a standard enemy fight and not add boss music or a boss health bar. But clearly the team who made this fight disagrees. This is just a nothing boss. That's just pointless filler. Nothing more, nothing less. F. Finally, we actually have a good boss. Took us a good one while, but it's kind of a bit of a stretch. The Duke's Dear Fraser, or Fraser, I don't know how to pronounce that word. But first, this boss is actually one of the only good 4 major lords you fight against. For a giant spider that has 2 heads on each side, this spider can throw out various attacks such as stomping around, shooting out lasers for some reason, and is armored. Somehow more armored than the actual armor spider in Demon Souls. I don't know how you get that to happen. You have to attack the heads in order to even do damage to the boss. And the only annoyance is the spider enemies that are in the middle of the battle, but if you manage to bring a torch with you, you don't have to worry about them. But they're not much that issue to deal with. And thankfully, I actually kind of like them being there since they make the fight a bit more hectic and enjoyable in my opinion. Since the boss itself is kind of basic, but it's just this frantic, constant avoiding of the little guys attacking you. And thankfully with the life gems, you'll be able to avoid taking a lot of damage and get some healing while you have the chance. So I say, this is a good boss after the pile of mediocrity, so I'll take what I can. I'm gonna give you a B. Whenever I look at Dark Souls, I think of all the monstrosities, eldritch horrors, just all these creative monsters to fight against. And then you have this thing. Royal Rat Authority. This is just sad. It doesn't even look like a frickin' rat. It just looks like a weird rabid hyena. There's nothing cool about it. But what's also not cool? Adding enemies into your boss fight. Seriously, we already dealt with this with Capra Demon. But here, it's even worse. The 4 little rats are annoying to hit, they inflict toxic, and trying to avoid taking damage from them is annoying, and you only have a couple seconds to deal with them before the head honcho joins in the battlefield. And it's just not really that fun. But once they're out of the way, the boss fight might as well be over, since the Authority himself barely does anything that's noteworthy, has shitty hitboxes, and just has a puke attack. Okay, cool. But the biggest gripe I have with this boss is, it's not original, music is forgettable, no lore tie-in whatsoever, and it's just a bunch of free souls that you can just grind up to with no issues whatsoever. I want to talk about this garbage boss. F. So, what's in this room? A lot of rats. And this sounds like boss music, but it's just a bunch of fucking rats. I don't get it. Oh, there's the actual boss. Let's wear at him. Oh, it's over. That's the boss. What was the point of that? It's just a standard rat. Oh, but he has a mohawk, and he does double damage. But he's so easy to kill. What was the point of this boss battle? It's just a bunch of rats. I don't see what's so fun about it. The rats are not fun to fight against. The boss is over before it even begins. And I came to play Dark Souls to kill eldritch horrors, not play fucking rat extermination. F. Alright, time for the final lord to talk about, that being the Rotten. I will say his design is kinda cool. It's a nightmare feeling kind of monstrosity. Just a bunch of amalgamated bodies form into this blob mass with a butcher cleaver. But boss fight itself doesn't really do a whole lot. Just basic swine ape stomps around with his fist. and has explosions, I guess. I mean, he's cool looking, but the fight is an unforgettable boss. The arena, however, does make things a bit more tricky to manage since the fire will kill you. But you can also cut off his arms, because, why not? Even though he does grow them back, which I think is a cool detail, but honestly, there's nothing really exciting, and it would have been the last thing I would expected from going through such an awful area to begin with. Another D-tier boss. Ooh, what's behind this door? Seriously? Dragon Rider? Again? Oh, but there's two of them, and one has a bow! What's the difference? It's just two Dragon Riders! It's not like Dragon Rider himself was that impressive of a boss. This is just pointless filler! Another pointless boss that just exists because why not? Why Dragon Rider of all things? The guy with the bow is so easy that he might as well not even be there, and it's just basic Dragon Rider. Again. Just... why, FromSoft? What's the point of this battle? It's pointless. It's filler. It serves no purpose whatsoever. These two should die. F. Finally! A good boss battle! It took us this long. The Looking Glass Knight. Visually, this fight easily has the best atmosphere in my opinion. Any boss fight level that has a rainy environment is an instant win for me. And on his own, sure, the fight is pretty basic, but it's the atmosphere that nails it down for me. And on his own, he does throw out a few sword combos and swings, even utilizing the power of electricity from his sword to throw out electric projectiles or a tough swing. His shield is a giant mirror that has your attacks bounce off of it instead of hitting it to do damage, which I think is a creative twist. What's also a creative twist is that mirror isn't just for show. He can even use it to summon a actual real player or an NPC if you're offline. The NPC itself isn't really that tough to manage through, but I think it's a cool addition that makes the fight a bit more interesting than it already is. Overall, we finally got a boss that's actually good and deserves some praise, since I think this is one of the more underrated fights in my opinion. I do wish he was a bit more challenging and his summoning was a bit shorter, since it made the fight challenging but a bit more enjoyable in my opinion. Also, fun fact, originally during the game's beta, they originally had the Looking Glass Knight summon Ruined Sentinels in his boss battle. I'm glad they actually changed it. B tier. Here's another nothing boss battle. I'll give it this, at least the design is creative. It's a foreskin frog that has a giant head and arms sticking out of it. I think that's kinda neat. And I do like that when you enter the boss arena, this thing doesn't attack you instantly, it's just sitting there, singing the Milfanto song. It's just kinda cool. However, Demon of Song is also a basic beast boss. You just have to wear out his face since the foreskin is protection. And all he does is just slap you around with his hands and hops around, I guess. Use that frog arms of his to try to smack you. It's pretty basic stuff, and I feel like this boss would have been utilized a bit more better if the game wasn't rushed. But as it is, it's just another basic and nothing boss that just kind of exists. Cool idea, but weak execution. D tier. Now we are finally getting another good boss, that being Velstadt, the Royal Aegis. However you pronounce that last bit. On his own, Velstadt feels like a basic enemy in terms of his attacks and moves that he throws out. But as a boss, I think it's utilized kinda, well, since he does hit hard and fast, but not too fast to where it becomes an issue. He does buff himself at half health and has a magic attack that can easily be avoided, but he does do a bit of double damage with his attacks. On his own, it's actually pretty simple and basic stuff, but one of the few bosses that's kind of underrated and deserves a bit of credit, at least in my opinion. So overall, I say this boss definitely deserves appreciation for what he has to offer, especially for one that is very loyal to the king and will do anything he can to prevent you from reaching to Vendrick. So I give him a solid B. At least we're finally getting some good bosses around here. But sadly, we're back down to the dullness. Again. That being the Guardian Dragon. It's visually cool to fight this boss in this arena like it's a bird but boss battle-wise, boring. He'll spend most of his time just doing nothing but AoEs constantly. And even when he's on the ground, his moveset is very basic and boring swipes and stomps that for some reason have janky hitboxes. And it's just a nothing boss that didn't really need to be a boss, especially since this dragon gets utilized as an enemy before and upwards into the next level upon beating him. So what was the point of making this the boss battle? It's just really not that fun. Heck, even the music kinda sucks. For some reason, there's weird pauses in between certain parts of the soundtrack that makes it feel a little awkward, like the soundtrack was kinda rushed. So overall, just a nothing boss, and just kind of a waste of time. D tier. Up next, in my opinion, is probably the worst boss in the entire base game. That being Ancient Dragon. I just wish Gwen was here so he can fucking kill this thing. I hate Ancient Dragon so much. There's so many issues with this boss. For starters, look at how much health he has. He has way more than the final boss of the base game. Why? And secondly, it's a stupid fight. Many people try to employ various tactics on how to take down Ancient Dragon, like camping behind his heels, even though that's a terrible idea, or trying to wail at his neck a few times with a long-range weapon in order to actually get some hits in on his head. I do this strategy because, since I'm a lowlife that uses hammers, this is an easy strategy for me to get a lot of hits in and make him use the same attacks. The biggest annoyance is his freaking AoE Fire Breath that covers most of the arena, does ridiculous damage, heck even his stomps do a lot of damage. It's just a boring boss fight that just drags for way too long and it's really not that fun or enjoyable. Heck, his run back in the original game was horrendous. It took me so many tries to beat him because of this awful run back. I'm so glad Scholar of the First Sin made his run back tolerable, because just kill the Golden Knight at the staircase and you won't have an issue of dealing with the other guys attacking you. But even then, there's nothing fun about Ancient Dragon. It's a boring boss fight regardless of what strategy you use, and it's just really not that fun nor worth the hassle of fighting. Even for a lot of souls, that's enough to level you up. F. Such a garbage boss. Up next is the Giant Lord, and he's basically the last giant, but now with a sword. That's it. That's all I have to say. Visually, getting to him does look kinda cool, but he's such a dull encounter. All he does is flail his sword around while you just nibble on his ankles, bite on his little toes until he dies, which is boring. You think with all the required steps that you need to go through to fight this guy, it would be a worthwhile encounter, but it's just a dull and boring boss battle that's just not really much fun or worth it. This is the last giant from the frickin' past, and this is how he goes out. A pathetic dud. Overall, just a waste of time. Moving on. F. Finally! A boss that's actually good! In fact, great! That being Dark Lurker. You had to go through such a hassle just to fight this guy, and it's actually worthwhile. The chasms required you to do these trials where you have to light up the torches, face off a bunch of NPCs, and you get greeted with a very difficult secret boss. What's the deal with Dark Lurker? In Phase 1, he'll show off various attacks that he'll throw out at you, such as an explosive orb that chases after you, explosive fireball projectiles, a magic missile, even utilizing some melee attacks for opportunities to damage him, a laser attack when he flies up in the air, all of these attacks that he'll throw out just to showcase. But that's only the beginning. Because once you get him to half health, he'll literally clone himself, and that's where the real fun begins. Despite the attacks I told you, it's easy to telegraph what attacks Dark Lurker will throw out, and he is very slow and reactive enough to where you can see them coming. But they do a lot of damage. Each attack that he throws out does feel like it's my fault when I get hit instead of it being cheap nonsense. It manages to be a tough gank fight that's very fair and enjoyable overall, and it's definitely worth the hassle of facing. It is annoying that you have to go through the annoying, awful NPCs just in order to even fight this guy. But I will say it was definitely worth the hassle and enjoyment of fighting a secret boss that's actually good. Even by the series standards, his attacks just go all out. So, Dark Lurker is the only boss in this base game that deserves a lot of credit for what he offers. A tier. Sadly though, we have to talk about the former king of Drangleic, King Vendrick. Upon coming across him, you'll see that he's a hollowed out former shell of himself just like with Gwen, and he doesn't even take notice of you when you enter in his arena. So you had to go out and get some giant souls in order to even actually fight Vendrick. And upon fighting him, the fight sucks! All he does is throw his sword around, jump around, and it's pretty easy but annoying to avoid his attacks, especially since they hit so hard, asshole. It's just really not that fun because you'll just spend most of the fight just camping behind his butt and just smacking his back legs. It's not that fun of a counter. It's a shame too, since music, atmosphere, and presentation is all nailed down correctly, but the actual fight is just so lackluster. They had the opportunity and they just blew it. It's a damn shame too, because I want to like Vendrick, but at least we actually get to talk to the old man, so it's not a complete loss. Now we're heading up to Endgame, where we get to the finale of the game, starting with the penultimate fight against the Throne Watcher and Throne Defender. Now these two aren't Ornstein or Smo levels of awesomeness, but for a duo fight, it's really not that bad. You get introduced to two defenders that have one goal in mind, and it's to defend the throne from any intruders. Throne Defender is the big slow guy that will try to charge at you, while Watcher is the person in the white suit that's fast and agile. Both will try to take turns at charging and attacking you and putting their shields up, and they both do have a second phase where they charge up their swords that does a bit more damage. However, my biggest gripe is that their AI can be a little random at times. Sometimes they'll either charge at you or sometimes they'll just stay in the back, no matter what phase. And you have to be quick on taking them out, because if one is still alive at full health and the other one is dead, they'll revive each other at full health. And it's kind of annoying to have to deal with them doing the reviving gimmick, despite it being 20 seconds. But it is what it is. If only the arena was built a little bit better and made for this battle, then maybe this would be a much better duo fight. But as it is, it's just pretty average and could have used a little bit more work, in my opinion. So I'm giving them a solid C. Now we get to talk about the final boss of the base game, Nashandra. the main antagonist of the game, one that you have seen a couple times throughout the game, one who has been responsible for the downfall of Drenlek, the one who is responsible for King Vendrick to go into hiding, dealing with the Giant War, and all because she wanted the throne. She confronts you after dealing with the throne duo, and seeing you in a weak state, that would have been perfect opportunity. However, despite all of that, the fight sucks! Seriously, I don't know why many people put this lady a bit higher up in their list, because for a boss fight, she's very underwhelming. Her only major attack is cursing you with these orbs that can be destroyed, but if you just lure her away from the orbs, they won't be much of an issue to worry about, and her scythe attacks are pretty easy to avoid. The only annoyance is the AoE that just comes out randomly, and she does have a laser. If she was a throwaway boss, then maybe I could cut her some slack. But here's the catch. She's the game's final boss! And for a final boss, it's super easy and underwhelming. As much as I'm not really a fan of Gwen, at least that fight was actually challenging. With Nashandra, it's barely much of a challenging fight, let alone one that actually deserves to be higher up compared to most other awful bosses in the entire series. This is easily the weakest final boss FromSoft has created in the entire base game, and that's not even including DLC. So, yeah, this lady just deserves to rot for all I care. F. Now we get to the other final boss. After beating Nashandra, you'll get some dialogue from Aldia. In order to even fight Aldia, you have to kill Vendrick, and once you do that, Aldia will show up as the true final boss of the game. And since he's the true final boss, he's fine, I guess. The fight itself isn't really anything heavy or personal. He's here just to test you to see if you are worthy of the throne. So he'll try to throw out various attacks that aren't really difficult, but nothing really too exciting, such as fireball attacks. His one massive fireball move will try to bait you into wanting to do damage to him, but can kill you. His vines that he'll throw out, which can be a bit of a nuisance, and his fire barrier. I do appreciate him having that, since instead of making him just a simple target that he can just wail at constantly, but it is of a nuisance since it does a lot of damage. But on his own, it's just a pretty mediocre final boss at best. It's nothing too exciting, but it's definitely better than whatever the hell Nashandra was offering. So I say Aldia was kind of worth the hassle to fight against, but I don't get why he needed to fight us. Considering he saw us destroy every single other monster, you'd think he wouldn't stand a chance against us, but to each their own, I guess. But I do like the music. The music is kind of nice. Not one of my favorites, but one of the more underrated tracks in my opinion. So at least Aldia was definitely worthy of being the final boss. So he gets a C tier for me. Now, we get to talk about the DLC bosses. I didn't bother skipping because, unlike with the first game, you don't get thrown to New Game Plus upon beating the final bosses, unless you want to. So thankfully we can have the option to do DLC. And for the first DLC I dealt with, I had my run with Alana, the Squalid Queen. And for the first boss of the DLCs I faced, she's a bit of a mixed bag. On one hand, her attacks consist of various dark magic attacks she'll throw out, whether it's these projectiles, it's the fire magic she does, swinging around with her halberd and teleporting. It's pretty simple stuff to showcase. However, she does have one gimmick, and that is summoning. She can summon enemies in the battle, 3 different types, the first being the skeletons. They're not really that bad to handle since only one attacks you, despite being 3, and they are pretty easy to kill, so they're not much of an issue combined with her attacking you with her various magic attacks, since she is kind of slow and easy to read on what attacks she'll throw out if you keep distance. However, the second enemy she summons is Velstadt? Why is he here? Although, sadly, I didn't have my experience with him since she kept summoning skeletons for me. But for Velstadt, he is probably the worst out of the three since he's super fast and aggressive with his giant hammer, and combined with her, it makes for a very tough fight to try to manage through, with him and her just attacking you at different times. But I heard it is the better one to handle for a challenge. And the third one is piggies. Yep, she summons actual piggies in the battle. I don't know why, but to each their own, I guess. But honestly, since with the skeleton, she wasn't really that terrible to manage through. It was actually kind of a fun boss fight to go through. Maybe my opinion would change if I ever refought her and got Velstadt, but I doubt that I'll ever replay Dark Souls 2 again. So I'm going to give her a B. Dark Souls 2 DLCs are a bit on the shorter end since most of them would just have 2 bosses for you to come after, but there are 3 bosses in each DLC, each containing an optional area and optional boss for you to confront. And I had my run with the Grave Robber trio, or known as the Gang Squad, Kreia, Grave Robber, and Varg. And speaking personally, I don't really hate these guys, to be honest. You'd think with just being 3 generic, boring NPCs, this fight would be miserable. But I managed them perfectly fine. The only annoyance is Varg and the Grave Robber both chasing after you, and Kreia just sniping you with frickin' the bow. But if you take care of Kreia quickly, you only have the Grave Robber and Havel to worry about. These two will try to act like Throne Watcher and Defender, where they try to take turns attacking you. But it's a bit of a nuisance since Havel will just butt in and try to attack you instantly when you're trying to fight against Grave Robber himself. On its own, it's not really terrible since the NPCs can be staggered, and Havel can be easily dealt with backstabs. But I don't really hate this boss battle when fighting it normally. Even without any NPCs to help me, I don't really think the fight is as terrible as everyone made it out to be. Don't get me wrong, I don't like fighting NPCs, especially since I already dealt with these guys after dealing with Dark Lurker. What makes you think I want to fight him again? But it's just really nothing exciting or enjoyable. But I guess I did have a little bit of fun, so I'll give him that at least. I'm gonna give him a C. It's probably gonna be an unpopular opinion. Just like with the first game, it only take until DLC to actually give us a good dragon fight. Honestly, the more I think about it, Sith is kind of on par with Calamite in terms of boss battle. You do get to see dragon roaming around in the DLC, just like with Calamite in the first game. But the only difference is with Sith is that he inflicts toxic from his fire breath. Which kind of makes sense since he has a spear impaled inside him. So, that's fine. The toxic isn't really that much of a nuisance. What is a nuisance is his constant flying. He does love to fly, and it kind of drags the fight a little bit. Sure, on the floor, he's nothing too exciting since his moveset is pretty basic. Simple swipes, breathing fire, all that kind of stuff. But when flying in the air, it only feels like I dodged the flame breath by the skin of my teeth. He's kinda on par with Calamite in terms of boss battles, since the fight itself is also pretty solid, just nothing too major or heavy to really worry about. He does have the issue where your weapons degrade upon damaging his body, but my weapon never broke during the boss battle, unlike with most other people. Which is strange to say the least, but overall, this was quite an enjoyable boss fight, and for one of the final bosses of the DLC, I say this one is definitely a good fight in my opinion. Solid B tier. Onward to the second DLC, and one of the 3 bosses being Fume Knight. This guy is regarded by many to be the hardest boss in the game, and for many reasons. The first phase, he's using the big great sword and a normal sword for his various attack moves. His attack pattern kind of functions like a Dark Souls 3 boss, and it does make it a bit of a nuisance to try to avoid his various attacks due to the way his combat system is built compared to us in Dark Souls 2, and has some janky hitboxes, but I never really had much issues with this boss. I enjoyed the fight for what it has to offer. The first phase isn't really that bad to get used to with his double sword attacks that he'll throw out, and the second phase, he'll heat up his sword to where it brings out flames and does a lot more damage, and he's pretty fast with his attack moves. But I do like his attack moves and how he functions. It makes him a challenging but yet fair enough fight to manage through. Also, if you come into the fight while wearing Velstat's helmet, he'll instantly trigger to phase 2, which I think is a cool detail considering the lore behind Fume Knight and Velstat. But it does make the fight a bit easier to manage through since you won't have much attack patterns to worry about, and you don't have to deal with phase 1. But overall, I say Fume Knight is a pretty great boss, and definitely one of the better ones in the DLC. I swear, why does the DLC have better bosses than the frickin' base game? A mystery we will never know about, so he deserves an A tier. Goodness me, that was close. What's behind this gate? Really? Really? A smelter demon? What's the difference? Oh, but this one is blue. He has some kind of emis's blue aura around him, which is lame. Look, I know I bashed the first game for lazy reskins, but this, out of all bosses, I don't mind Ancient Smelter Demon since he does have a bit more delay on some of his attacks and he does do a little bit more damage. But if the original Smelter Demon didn't exist, this boss would definitely deserve some praise. But it's just a lazy reskin. What more can I say? And it wouldn't be so bad if maybe the run back to him wasn't so horrendous. It's just really not worth fighting this reskin boss. And as much as I want to put him to F tier, he is a bit more challenging than the original, which I can appreciate since I do like Smelter Demon. But at the same time, it's a lazy reskin that deserves no respect from me, so down at the D tier where you belong. Don't bother fighting this guy. Sir Alone. This guy is easily the best boss in the entire game. His run back may have been annoying, but it's not awful. And the fight? Oh man, where do I begin? The atmosphere is phenomenal. Sure, it's nothing spectacular, but the fact this man has a clean floor is just wow. He also does a little bow nod when you enter into his boss arena, and his movesets? Oh boy, I never had an issue with his attacks or his moves. Some people may have come across janky hitboxes, but I never came across such issues. His attacks are all fair and straightforward, and whenever he does a move that I get hit from, it's basically my fault and not his. He does have projectiles, even though I don't know what's the point of giving him that. And I do like that he plays fair into this game's clunky combat system. With Fume Knight, he felt like he could have belonged in Dark Souls 3 based on his moveset, but for Sir Alone, he does attack you, but it's fair enough to avoid, and at least gives you opportunities to attack him, and he also jumps away, making this fight an epic one-on-one duel. And the music! I love the music so freaking much! This sounds like it would be in Dark Souls 3! They didn't need to go this hard, especially for a boss that's optional. and considering this game has some optional bosses that are really not that good, so alone makes up for that. This fight deserves not only an A tier for me, but an absolute S tier. This is a fantastic boss battle, and in my opinion, the best out of the entire lineup in Dark Souls 2. No matter what, nothing can convince me otherwise. Up next on our list is the White Tiger. This tiger definitely has one eye that he uses for a laser, got possessed, and... What? Wrong game! Again with Neo, stop! Okay, now let's get to the White Tiger herself, Ava, the king's pet. Now, upon entering this arena, the tiger itself is invisible, and you need to explore around to get a certain item in order to make it visible. And judging by the way I thought Ava and seeing the many reviews of people saying their opinions, Ava is a decent boss in my opinion. Her moveset is pretty simple and basic, simple swipes, a jump attack, a bite move, projectiles, and a random AoE explosion. Why do nearly every boss have that? But I never had any issues with Ava having janky hitboxes. I felt like her hitboxes on her attacks were really alright, and I never had the issue of my weapon degrading. So I say Ava is kind of a decent boss at best. It's nothing really exciting or something I could get angry at. It's just a pretty alright fight considering one of the first of the 3 bosses in this DLC. But overall, it was pretty enjoyable. Nothing too exciting. C tier. Alright, let's get to the next boss. Starting up on our list is the king himself. Wait, what? There's another boss? How can there be another boss? Well, who is it? Oh no. Oh no. No. No, not them. Please, no, not them. Oh my Halloween soul, I hate Lud and Zalin. Words cannot describe how much I despise these 2 giant cats from hell. Where do I even begin with these 2? It's Ava, but black. There's nothing different. You're literally fighting a reskin. Ava herself was a fine enough boss on her own. What made him think adding 2 more Avas would be a good idea? There's nothing creative about the fight, and besides, these 2 don't work together as a gang fight. Their hitboxes are surprisingly more jankier than Ava. The second one can go in rage to where he regenerates health, has defense increase, and does double damage. Also, he takes less damage upon your attacks, which is totally fair. Ugh. And this fight is one of the most questionable things I've ever seen. On its own, it may not look that terrible, and not really that hard, because it really shouldn't be. But the thing that pushes them to being the worst is the area they're in. Frigid Outskirts is one of the worst levels I have ever played in this entire game. How would you like to go through a barren wasteland with a blizzard that impales your vision, Kieran's attacking you from left, right, and center with near impossible to avoid attacks, shooting lightning at you, and ganking on you, and having the health of a boss? Yeah, totally fair. And the first thing that lingers into my mind when I get to these 2 is like, please don't let me die. I don't want to fight these 2 again. And they just didn't care. This boss in this area is the definition of... What were they thinking? Easy answer. They weren't. This boss was a mistake. I don't know what they were thinking. I hate these 2 more than Bed of Chaos. And that is saying a lot about the absolute worst boss in the series. There is nothing positive I can say about these 2 cats. take my advice, use this video as a perfect example to never fight these two. The reward is not worth the hassle. So in short summary, fuck Lud and Zalin! These two tigers can rot in frigid outskirts for all I care. F! Alright. I'm calm now. Now let's get to the final boss of the DLC. And this whole entire game, assuming if you didn't do the final boss, that being the Burnt Ivory King. I'll say his arena is really cool. The nice looking background, the showcase of him entering into the arena through that massive wall is just impressive. That being said, I'm mixed about this boss. For starters, you have to build up your knight army in order to fend off the other dark knights in order to even progress on. Because without them, you can't deal with the other enemies attacking you, and they infinitely respawn, even in the middle of the boss battle. So you need the knights, which I think is really tedious to do phase 1 since it's only just a prelude to the actual fight. And when the Burnt Ivory King shows up himself, he's fine. His moveset is pretty basic stuff, and he does have a second phase where he lights up his sword for stronger attacks. But on his own, he's pretty basic and alright. Nothing really too exciting to fight against. But for the last boss of the DLC, I think it does an alright job concluding all of the DLCs entirely. Assuming if you don't do Lud and Zalin last. But I will say that at least the DLCs did offer a bit more, and I appreciate the creativity of what they did for the king himself. But it's a decent final boss, nothing more, nothing less. So, C tier. Alright. We finally finished Dark Souls 2. Holy shit, so many fucking bosses, dude. This is gonna be a tedious chore to go through. Well, onward to Dark Souls 3, and I'll see you there for that.